And for our final story for this 100th edition of the Rolling Stone Gang, we turn our eyes once again to that sludge hole, Washington, D.C., particularly to Dr. Anthony Fauci, who has become either the most beloved man in the country or the most despised. Now, full disclosure here. When this whole pandemic started, I actually was I was never like an enthusiastic supporter of Dr. Fauci. I never thought I needed a shirt with his image on it. I thought that the images of him as a superhero coming out were like, really? That seems to be another sign of our juvenile and comicized culture. And I say that as a fan of comic book characters, actually. But I did think, like, okay, you know what, this is new, this is, we don't know anything about the COVID-19, and so, you know, give the guy some slack. Sure, he's working hard, trying to figure out what exactly is the best thing to do. That was me early on, and even through, I have to admit, even through June and July, I got annoyed with people who made ad hominem attacks against him. But for almost a year now, my support has dwindled, and now you can count me as one of the people who really has nothing but disdain for Herr Dr. Fauci. And this past week, he said something in an interview with MSNBC that just solidified that loss of respect or any sort of kindly feelings that I might have towards the man. This is a quote that Fauci gave when he was giving an interview to MSNBC. Quote, "It's very dangerous. A lot of what you're seeing as attacks on me, quite frankly, are attacks on science. Because all of the things that I have spoken about consistently from the very beginning have been fundamentally based on science. People want to fire me or put me in jail for what I've done, namely, follow the science." Unquote. Well, that has to be one of the biggest lies of at least this month. I'm sure that the Biden administration will send out some sort of lie that will top that. Just give them some time, and I'm sure they'll come up with something. But this has to be one of the biggest lies of June. Okay, and of course, what makes this even funnier is that this is coming after the release of Fauci's emails through a Freedom of Information Act, which revealed, okay, so these emails of Fauci's, they were with heads of departments, they were with heads of corporations like Mark Zuckerberg, and Fauci actually admits that, you know, the coronavirus could have come from a lab. You know what? Masks, they really aren't that effective. Oh, FYI, there is a new study out from the University of Louisiana, I believe, which actually shows that no, masks didn't stop anything from happening. It didn't actually prevent the virus from spreading. So there you go. Fauci in those emails was actually correct. So basically, what has fired up people about these emails is that in these private emails, Fauci was admitting, yeah, you know, what we're doing really isn't going to work. But when he was in public, he was saying, oh yes, you've got to stay 6 feet apart, you've got to wear a mask, you've got to do this, we've got to stay locked down, we've got to stay locked down, we've got to stay locked down. In fact, gang, it was just a month ago, it was on Mother's Day, that Fauci was saying, well, you know, hopefully by next Mother's Day, we'll be back to normal. That was the modus operandi. That is what had become the normal. They would say, okay, by this point, we'll be back to normal. Okay, but then within a month, 6 weeks from that date, well, you know, they would come out and say, well, hopefully by another point in time, further away, we'll be back to normal. Biden was doing this when he first got into office. He said, well, hopefully by the spring we'll be back to normal. And then it was, well, hopefully by 4th of July we'll be back to normal. And then it was, well, hopefully by Christmas we'll be back to normal. Fauci was doing the same thing just a month ago, on Mother's Day. Hopefully by next Mother's Day we'll be back to normal. And then, of course, someone in the bureaucracy flipped a switch, and all of a sudden, oh my gosh, you know what? We don't need to distance anymore. Oh my gosh, we don't need to wear masks anymore. Oh my gosh, would you look at that? Maybe this thing did escape from a lab. Oh my gosh, would you just look at that? Everything has been flipped upside down and inside out. That is what has angered so many people. Justly so, by the way. Because Fauci, it seems now from these emails, was deliberately perpetuating a fraud. That's what he was doing. So when he says that he was just following the science, bull! He wasn't following the science. Not in the slightest. Because it also turns out, for example, that all the crazy things that Trump was suggesting, like UVA light and hydrochlorocoxine, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, it now turns out, oh yeah, UVA light, it really does help get rid of it. Oh, hydrochlorocoxine, or however I pronounce it, I'm sure someone in the comments will correct my pronunciation. Yeah, that actually looks good. And in fact, then people have found out that 80% of the people who had to be hospitalized for the COVID were either A, unhealthy to begin with, like they were obese or they were susceptible to pneumonia or they had diabetes or something else, and 2, they were vitamin D deficient. And where do you get vitamin D primarily? From the sun, from sunlight. And we've known this, gang, since last July, since last August, when experts and researchers were saying, you know what, sunlight could actually be a good way of getting rid of this thing, of preventing you from actually being taken seriously ill if you contract it. And yet we were told that we couldn't go out as normal. No, you had to stay locked down, you had to stay locked down, you had to stay locked down. But there's something even worse about this claim from Herr Dr. Fauci. I'm going to reread what he said to MSNBC one more time. A lot of what you're seeing as attacks on me, quite frankly, are attacks on science. Because all of the things that I have spoken about consistently from the very beginning have been fundamentally based on science. What he is doing there is he is equating himself with science. Herr Dr. Fauci is now the personal incarnation of science. And that, forget about the hubris. Forget about the hubris, forget about the pride and the vanity and the puffed up peacockery of it all. But honestly, think about this, okay? What now? Since the 16th century? 17th century? For several centuries, we have done the physical sciences. So, chemistry, physics, medicine, things like that. We have followed the scientific method. Someone asks a question in one of those fields, and then they form a hypothesis to explain that question, and then they experiment, and they experiment, and they experiment, and they experiment, and they experiment. And every time the experiment proves their hypothesis wrong, then they retweak the hypothesis, because every quote-unquote failure brings them closer to the truth. So finally, if they do experiment after experiment after experiment and it's not contradicting the data or the hypothesis, and other scientists in the field can actually replicate those experiments and they get the same results, then you can say that your hypothesis is a theory, which is a little stronger, okay? Okay, we're a little bit more sure that this is actually what is actually happening. So this has been the scientific method now for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. This is how, especially in the physical sciences, we have increased our knowledge through hands-on experimentation. Ask questions, form a hypothesis to answer the question, and then hands-on, time to get your hands dirty, roll up the sleeves and experiment, experiment, experiment. And every time until you get to a theory. Now, however, the scientific method is being discarded. Because think of it like this. If Dr. Fauci is the incarnation of science, then whatever he says is scientific truth. Never mind what the data says, never mind what experiment says, never mind what other scientists in the field say, who might actually have more hands-on experience than he does, because he's been a government bureaucrat for the last, 45, 50 years? Something like that. I mean, I think he served in the government since the late 60s, early 70s. So he's a doctor, yes, but anymore, he's become a bureaucrat. That's what he has become. But when you equate science, quote unquote, science, with one person, then you're in for a whole world of help, of trouble and hurt. Because ask yourself this, gang, what actually is science? What is science? It's knowledge. It's knowledge, gang. That's what science is. It's knowledge. Knowledge about the physical world, okay, especially again if we're talking about the hard sciences. It's knowledge about the physical world and knowledge of how to find answers to questions pertaining to the physical world. That's what science is. So now, if we're saying that science is not knowledge, if it's not a process, a pathway towards knowledge, then if it's simply a person, what you've done is that you have basically turned that person, that incarnation of science or whatever, into an infallible Delphic oracle. The problem, of course, though, being is that humanity is infallible. That's one of the great lessons of history, that men are infallible, woefully, terribly, not infallible, but are fallible. Excuse me, not infallible, but fallible. One of the big lessons of history is that mankind and men are woefully, horribly fallible. And we are in general wrong a lot more than we are right. And that's just the sad truth of it. So in order to understand it, and then that gets you right back into ideology. Because now here Dr. Fauci equals science, which means that here Dr. Fauci is infallible because whatever he says is science, right? Well, now, this means we're right back into ideology, because now you have to discard the idea that man is fallible, and even more than that, now you have set up a caste system that maintains the ideology, because no matter what head Dr. Fauci says, it's science, because he's the incarnation of science. But which now means that actual knowledge is not attainable for regular people. The great thing about science, the great thing actually about logos, about reason, is that we all have the potential to find answers. Now, some of us may not have the inclination or the time or the training to do so, but we all have that potential. But now, if one person is equated, tightly chained together with a body of knowledge, then that means that anyone else doesn't have the knowledge. They don't even have the potential to find that knowledge anymore. So what we actually end up with is a rule of demigods. What Fauci has done is what the ancient Greeks called apotheosis. It was the transformation of a mortal into a deity. That's what That's what Fauci has done here. He has basically deified himself as the 21st century god of science, meaning that he is the holder of any and all scientific wisdom, which means that you poor plebes, all you can do is hold out your hands for the crumbs that come from his mouth and be grateful for those. And that is, not only is that contrary to republicanism, small r republicanism, but that is contrary to the dignity of man, because it goes against what we of course know, that man is fallible. And it's putting us again, tie this back to that first video, where more and more people, fewer and fewer entities are now, a smaller and smaller group of entities are now controlling our destiny, such as home ownership. What we are now doing is that a smaller and smaller group of people are taking ever more and more control and power over our lives. That's where we're at, gang. And it's not going to stop until we put a stop to it. And on that note, I am going to stop talking, gang, because I have talked way too long as usual. So, hope you had a great weekend. I'm uploading these on Monday instead of Sunday because of everything else that has gone wrong. So, hope that you had a great weekend. Hope that this coming week is good and blessed and wonderful for you all. Our regular Almstone video will be coming along this week, hopefully on Wednesday. Fingers crossed. And until I speak to you again, gang, stay safe and stay free by daring to read, think, speak, and write. Have a great week, guys. Talk to you soon. Ciao.